Sin in Space, Chapter 13. The big main hall of the lab was jammed with people, standing in earnest groups, strolling around, all talking at once. As the door slammed behind the doctor and the writer, the hubbub quieted, and 70-odd pairs of eyes turned on the newcomers. "Quite a delegation," Graham commented. "For me? I don't know," Tony confessed. He searched the room, saw Harv Stillman break away from a small group and head their way. "Hi, Tony. Did you bring a friend?" He turned to find Mimi Jonathan at his elbow. "Oh, Mimi. This is Douglas Graham. Did B tell you he was coming? Graham, Mimi Jonathan. Mrs. Jonathan is the lab administrator, in charge of making the wheels go round. And this is Harv Stillman. Harv used to be—" "A newspaper man himself?" Graham finished. "Nope." Harv grinned. "A radio teletype repairman with the IP." "What a switch!" Graham smiled back and shook the other man's hand. Tony turned from them to ask Mimi urgently, "How's it going? Did you finish up with the lab search yet?" "Afraid so. It's the same as the huts. Nothing's turned up," she said harshly. "We'll have to check the shipping crates." "Lord," breathed Tony. "What's the plan?" 5 crews to get out about 1 kilometer into the desert, 1/2 kilometer apart. Everybody else brings them crates one at a time. They open and search, repack before the next one comes in. No contamination from crates standing open. Through all this, you and Harv run back and forth, checking and handling crews, and the tote crews, to see that they don't get danger doses and remove and treat them if they do. We figure 4 days to finish the job." "Harv, do you think you're good enough to monitor the unpacking sites?" Tony asked. "Contamination from the native radioactives would be as bad as getting our own radiophosphorus into our radiomethylene blue." "I didn't want to go out and try it on my own. Do you think I can swing it?" "Sure, go pick us 5 of the coolest spots on Mars." The technician headed for the racked counters. "Doc, can you let me in on that cryptic business?" demanded Graham. "In a minute," said Tony, his eyes wandering over the crowd. "Excuse me." He'd spotted Anna and was starting her way when she turned, saw him, and approached. "We tried another feeding with the Candro baby," she began without a preamble. "But he didn't take to it. Choked it up again like yesterday." Tony took out his pipe and bit abstractly on the scarred stem. "No difference? No change at all?" "Not that I could see." "Tony, what's wrong with that baby?" The doctor shook his head unhappily. "I don't know," he admitted. There was something damnably wrong with the Candro baby, something he couldn't quite figure. There was a clue somewhere in the vividly remembered picture of a gasping red-faced infant choking and spluttering on a mouthful of milk. Should he have tried water instead of normal feeding to get those scrambled reflexes in order? "Doc," said Graham. "Oh," said Tony. "I better get the afternoon safety done right now. If you want to come along, you're welcome." Tony helped Graham into the suit of protective armor. He didn't usually bother with it himself on the afternoon inspection, when other people were all over the lab unprotected. In the morning it was different. The elaborate precautions of the outer door locker were necessary when a hotspot had possibly had time to chain overnight. But while work was actually going on, nothing very hot could develop without being noticed. The late check was primarily for the purpose of ensuring the absence of hot spots that could develop overnight. The doctor started his meandering course through the lab, with Graham in tow. "I'm making the second of our twice-a-day safety checks for excess radioactivity. It happens that we've got to unpack all our material scheduled for export, examine it, and repack it in a hurry if we want to get it aboard the outgoing rocket in time to get credit to pay our bills." "Just routine, I suppose?" asked Graham blandly. "I think you gathered that it certainly isn't. The fact is, your friend Commissioner Bell has accused us of harboring a thief and his loot, 100 kilos of marcane. We've searched everybody and everything so far except the export crates. Now we've got to search them." "Why not tell the old windbag to go blow?" "If we don't turn up the marcane, he can seal us up for 6 months to conduct an inch-by-inch search." "What's so dreadful about that?" Graham asked. "We're geared to 2 ships in 6 months now instead of 1 ship a year. If we miss 2 shipments, both incoming and outgoing, we'd be ruined." Graham grunted thoughtfully, and Tony waited. And waited. The grunt was all. He'd been half hoping the writer would volunteer to help, perhaps by picking up his anti-Bell crusade, or by promising to see his powerful friends, or by exposing the sorry mess to the public. But Graham, apparently forgetting the Bell business entirely, pitched the doctor a ferocious series of questions that threatened to stretch out the inspection endlessly. "What's in this box? Why isn't this conveyor shielded? What's the stock room? What do you do here? Is it technical or trade school stuff? Where did this soil come from? What'd you pay for it? Tile on this floor, concrete on that. Why? Who's in charge here? How many hours does he work? That many? Why? How many hours does he work? As Tony paraded solemnly back and forth with the counter, checking off items on his report, he pressed a little on the writer. This crate here, he said, is a typical sale. Radiophosphorus for cancer research. It goes to the Leukemia Foundation in San Francisco. It's a traceless pure, better than 99s. We're in business because we can supply that kind of thing. On Earth, they'd have to first make the traceless pure phosphorus and then expose it to a reactor or a particle accelerator, and the extra step there usually means it gets contaminated and has to be refined again. Here, we just produce phosphorus by the standard methods, and it is radioactive because the whole planet's got it. Not enough to present a health problem any more than cosmic rays on Earth do, but damn convenient for Sun Lake. Some crate, commented the writer. Lead, air gaps, built-in counter with a loud alarm. It's the law. Normally we have 5% of our manpower working in the shipping department. Now we have to unpack and recrate all this stuff in less than 4 days. You people should have a lobby, suggested Graham. If something like that was handicapping Pitco, they'd get rid of it quick. Are we just about through? Just about, said Tony flatly. So much for that, he thought. At least he'd given the writer an eyeful of the safety precautions they observed, and made him sweat a little under the heavy suit at the same time. Dinner time now, said Tony, buttoning on his tunic. Mess hall's here in the lab. Only building big enough. Synthetics? Asked Graham. No, that's not the Sun Lake idea. We want to get on an agricultural cycle as fast as we can. Sun Lake has to be able to live on vegetables that grow naturally without any fertilization except our own waste products. Naturally, we're strong on beans, kudzu, yams, goobers, any of the nitrogen-fixing plants that contain some natural protein. You'll see. Graham saw, he tasted, he expectorated. Into the shocked silence of the half-dozen at the table, he muttered an embarrassed apology and manfully choked down almost half his vegetable plate. Mars beans, barley, stewed greens, and another kind of stewed greens. To Tony he muttered when conversation had sprung up again. But why do they taste like a hospital smells? Do you have to disinfect them or something? Joe Gracie overheard it from the other side of the table. That's my department, he said. Nah, it isn't disinfectant. What you and most other people don't realize is that we with our lab are pikers compared to the lowliest cabbage in synthesizing chemicals. We taste the chemicals in our earth plants, and we accept them as the way they ought to taste. These are unfamiliar because these are Mars plants modified so that their chemicals aren't poison to Earth animals, or Earth plants modified so that Mars soil isn't poison to them. We're still breeding on this barley, which is generating too much iodoform for me to really be happy. If I can knock one carbon out of the ring. But you don't care about that. Just be glad we didn't try out the latest generation of our cauliflower on you instead of our test mice. The cauliflower, I'm sorry to say, generates prussic acid. Stick with those mice, said Graham, with a greenish smile. Only guaranteed Earth animals on Mars, including you, said Madge Cassidy, besides Graham. He watched her wonderingly as she finished her barley with apparent enjoyment. How was that again? My mice, the only animals on Mars guaranteed non-mutated. We have them behind tons of concrete and lead with remote feeding. It'd be no joke if some of the natural Mars radioactivity or some of the stuff flying around the lab mutated them so they'd gobble Mars food that was still poison to people. You mean I might go back to Earth and have a two-headed baby? It's possible, said Madge, getting to work on variety number 1 of stewed greens. Odds are somewhat higher that it happening from cosmic rays or industrial radioactivity on Earth, but mouse generations go by so fast that with them it's a risk we can't take. Some of the pork and beaners died very unpleasant deaths when they tried eating Mars plants as a last resort. It was the last resort, all right. But isn't anything on Mars good to eat? A couple items, Gracie told him. Stuff that would probably be poisonous to any native animal life if there was any. You find the same kind of thing on Earth, plants that don't seem to be good for anything in their native environment. My theory is that the ancestors of poison ivy and other such things aren't really Earth plants at all, but came to Earth, maybe as spores aboard meteorites. We need a broader explanation of the development of life than the current theory offers. We've grown a gigantic barley here, for instance, out of transplanted Earth stock, but it wouldn't be viable there. The gene was lethal on Earth. Here. He rattled on, to the accompaniment of Graham's nods and agreement, until Harv Stillman broke in. Hey, there was a rumor through the radio relay today. You know about it, Mr. Graham? Doug, the writer corrected. Okay, Harv smiled. About Marcane. No, not about us, he added hastily. About Marcane being forbidden in Tartary. The Cham pronounced a rescript, or whatever it was, and according to the guys in Marsport, that means the price goes up and Brenner's business is doubled. Do you know anything about it, Doug? The newsman looked surprised. It was all over the ship, he told them. Everybody was talking about it. How come you don't get it till now? The radio op on board told me he spilled it in his first message to PAC. It's true, then? Gracie asked sharply. I wouldn't know. I'm only a reporter myself. He looked across to Tony. Don't tell me Marsport wasn't buzzing with it. Brenner knew, didn't he? No, the doctor said slowly. I didn't hear anything about it there. But he had heard of a rumor. Who was it? Chabrier! Of course, that was Chabrier's rumor. Marcane prices going up, production will double, Brenner needs a new plant, needs a doctor too. Tony stood up abruptly. Excuse me. Gracie, are you finished? Want to come along? The agronomist rose quickly, and the two left together. On the way to collect Nick and go over to Jonathan's, Tony explained the situation rapidly to Gracie. I wanted to get the council together tonight anyhow, he finished up, to tell you about my idiotic brawl with Brenner. I don't know what kind of jam that's going to land us in, but this business ties in with what Chabrier told me. Rocket to Bell and Bell to Brenner, then the rest of us can get the news whenever the commissioner gets around to it. Makes a nasty picture, the agronomist agreed soberly. Now what? Where do we go from here? Damned if I know. Maybe one of the others can figure it. He knocked sharply on Nick's door.